welcome back to my channel. This is Anastasia, and today we're going to do something a little different this week. Mackenzie of Teen Mom OG, as well as Teen Mom 30 and 16 and Pregnant, has released a new book today called Straightening My Crown, and my Kindle decided to do a software update completely out of nowhere when I came to film this video. So while that's setting up, I'll just tell you a little bit about this book. Most of the teen moms have a biography written at this point, or an autobiography. I think everybody in the main cast except Chelsea has written one. You know, we got Farah's, Janelle even has one. They're all pretty bad, but also like so bad they're good. My personal favorite, as I always say, is Farah Abraham's. It is juicy, it is full of details, and it is just raunchy and ridiculous. So I finished reading Mackenzie's. I put some highlights in there. It was released on October 12, and Mackenzie herself doesn't seem to realize that it was already released. If you go on her Instagram, I was looking at it, and October 12, she didn't really post anything about it, so I'm like, that's a little weird. And then I look a few days later, and she finally posted a picture of it, and someone had commented, oh, I just read it, and she said, really? How did you get it already? So I don't know if she knows the release date. I thought that was kind of funny. So much like the other Teen Mom books, it is ghost written. It's just about her life leading up to the show and during the show. If you've watched the show and you've watched Mackenzie, you know she's very religious, very Southern girl, or she's from Oklahoma. I don't know if that's like the Midwest, but she's very, very country, very religious, as most Southern people are. So the book has a lot of Bible quotes in the beginning of every chapter, and at the end of every chapter is a Bible quote and a little passage about reflection. Not gonna lie, I kind of skip past it a little bit, because even though I myself am kind of religious, I don't really like to read about other people's religion, because I feel like it's just the same repetitiveness over and over. But if that's something that is interesting to you, you might find that more interesting than I did. If you're not a religious person, might want to skip past those parts. It's not as detailed as Farah's book or Leah Messer's recent book, but she did spill a little bit of tea. And warning, there are some disturbing moments from her childhood that we're going to talk about in here, so let's go ahead and get started. Once my Kindle finishes resetting. I swear it's never done a software update before today. So that was nice. Thanks, Amazon. Here is the cover of the book. It doesn't want to show it on my screen. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. She talks about the first time she had sex and her mom discovered her birth control in her drawer. My mom forbade me from staying on birth control after she found out I was sexually active, because in her mind, that was just giving me permission to have sex. I guess she trusted that I wouldn't sleep with my next boyfriend Josh either, because she never brought up the topic again. After that, I started rebelling. I used to listen to and respect my mom more, but then I started constantly talking back to my mom, and some days when I was told no, I would scream, punch holes in the wall, and destroy my room. My siblings thought I was a spoiled brat, and they were angry at the way I was treating our mom. Wouldn't think that of Mackenzie. She always acts like such a good, positive girl, but I guess she had her wild days. I never understood why my parents didn't have a conversation with me about pregnancy or sex before marriage, because they had experienced both as teenagers, and that's something that I was not aware of. You know, they always talk about how religious they were, but actually, Mackenzie's mom and dad were teen parents, and they were pregnant before they actually got married. They got married because they found out she was pregnant. So that was interesting, because I never knew that. Her mom was always acting very, sanctimonious over her, but turns out that she did the same thing. Getting pregnant at 16 wasn't something I could blame on the way my mom raised me. Some damaging things happened to me as a small child that ruined my self-esteem and must have contributed to the poor decisions I was making. I wasn't angry at my mom for those awful things, but I had kept them secret for years and she had no idea that they had even happened. So much like Mackenzie, her mom and her dad actually had a lot of kids. Just like her, they had, I believe, 5 or 6 kids, and they also adopted an older man with Down syndrome. They also lived in a trailer, but when they adopted the man with Down syndrome, whose name was Mike, Mike's mom had left the house to Mike in her will. So then when her parents adopted the Down syndrome man, Mike, they actually got the house and were able to move everybody in there. So convenient, God's blessing, I don't know. Having never been able to afford their own house, my parents wondered what they could have possibly done for God to give them this incredible opportunity. I just thought this is a funny little snippet. So the reason that Mackenzie says that she was named Mackenzie, according to her dad, is that my dad, on the other hand, tells a story of demanding that my mother drive him to McDonald's for a Big Mac while she was in labor with me on her way to the hospital. He insists that that must have been the inspiration for Mackenzie. She talks a lot about feeling very different from her siblings. Her siblings were all very religious, all waited until marriage to have sex, all listened to their mom and respected her, whereas she was kind of the spoiled brat, the baby of the family, and she always felt like an outcast. Her family always struggled with money. Her dad made minimum wage as a custodian at an elementary school. Although her mom said, while she may be short on money, she had a mansion waiting for her in heaven because she tithed and gave money to the church no matter how horribly we struggled. Was that something that always bothered me about religion? People are giving all their money to the church. You have 4 or 5 kids, maybe you should give that to your own family first. Another way she was always different from her siblings is that they were more introverted, whereas I've always been a true extrovert who wants nothing more than to be around people. Very talkative, very active. She was always into gymnastics and doing cheerleading, which is something we saw on the show. Now here's where she starts to get into when she was molested as a child, so if that's something that's going to bother you, you might want to click ahead of this. When I was around 4 years of age, there was a boy at the daycare my mom ran in her house who was about 8 years older than I was, so about 12 years old. We often played together, and one day he told me we were going to play a game where we would pretend to be dogs. I love games and dogs, so naturally I was excited. We began imagining that we were puppies, and he told me that I would have a special role to play. I was going to be the mommy dog, and he would be the daddy. Mommy dogs, he explained, didn't wear pants, and he pulled me into the closet and shut the door where no one could find us. I was the mommy dog, and I had to do puppy things, as all mommy dogs do. The boy did inappropriate things to me, and this happened a few times. I was confused, but I played along since I wanted so desperately to be liked. Another time when I was a small child, I was staying the night at the house of someone my mom trusted, and she had an older boy in his early teens. He told me he wanted to wrestle, and I was ready to throw down. Quickly, I realized this was a different type of wrestling than the one I played with my siblings back home. Things went in a direction that made me uncomfortable. At the time, I knew nothing. He did it nearly every time I visited. One time he asked me if I wanted to wrestle, and I told him no. With fire in his eyes, he yelled at me, "No, you are going to wrestle with me whether you want to or not." I've never seen him react so angrily and strongly when I refused to play other games, and I wondered why wrestling was so different. I figured that saying no must have been the problem, but I didn't know what I could do to make him like me again. I later realized how damaging this is to children. We learn at a young age that people will throw us away if we stand our ground. Yeah, and she seems to imply that this led to her later behaviors in life, such as having sex at an early age. And parents, I mean, you gotta be careful with letting your kids sleep over when they have an older brother. Something you gotta watch out for, unfortunately. Later, when she was in 5th grade, she goes to a hotel with her friend and they turn on the TV and they find the porn channels. As the movie went on, I started having flashbacks of the puppy game and the wrestling. I felt a sense of extreme discomfort wash over me as I realized what we were watching was an awful lot like that game and the wrestling that the older boys convinced me to do when I was younger. What was happening seemed naughty and wrong. It was reserved for adults and not something you should force on someone. That's been done to me before, I thought to myself in horror. I'm not a good human. I'm not as pure as my parents think I am. I felt like I finally had an answer for being different. I had been ruined. These incidents didn't spoil my entire childhood since I didn't realize it was wrong until later, but I know that it must have shaped my personality and influenced other choices that I had made. It was a lot to carry on my shoulders at a young age, and I knew if I told, I would be called a liar. I tried to convince myself that it was okay because adults had never done something terrible like this to me as a child. It was just younger boys. Still, I couldn't tell my parents what happened. And this is one instance where I think her religion actually helped her a lot because she talks at the end of the chapter about not holding grudge and actually holding forgiveness for these boys. So if that's something that brings her closure, then that can only be a good thing. Now she talks a little bit about how in 6th grade she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. In school, she was always going to the bathroom, so much to the extent that her teachers would give her detention for going back and forth to the bathroom. They said, "You must be texting your boyfriend." No matter what I said, they didn't believe me. Her mom starts to realize what's happening, and she says, "I'm gonna check your blood sugar level because I just got this new glucometer. Isn't it cool?" She was not very convincing. "Wait, no, I don't want to stick my finger in that. It'll hurt and bleed." I was a big drama queen, and everybody knew it. Slowly out of the corner of my eye, I saw the rest of my family file into the kitchen. Knowing that I was a big baby, my older sister Whitney came up with the idea that we would all take the test. I screamed, I kicked, and I wanted so badly to get out of it. After a tiny finger prick, I exclaimed, "That didn't even hurt." Looking down, I saw that the glucometer read high. No one else has said that. I turned to my mom, and instead of looking excited for me, her face had turned a ghostly white. I thought she was going to faint. Didn't appear to be a good sign from the look on my mom's face. I started to feel scared and out of control because I had no idea what was happening. I sprinted to the bathroom, slammed the door shut, curled up into a ball, and screamed at the top of my lungs until I looked up and saw my siblings standing in the doorway. But my siblings were not going to let me go through this alone, whatever it was. So they have to rush her to the ER, and they find out there that her blood sugar is 670, which is coma level. And her doctor says, "I'm sorry, miss, but she has juvenile diabetes," and they stabbed me with my first insulin shot. I immediately felt better, but I wasn't out of the woods yet. I had to go to a 3-day training to learn how to check my blood sugar and give myself insulin shots. I would struggle with this for the rest of my life. Like my dad, I would never get a break from it, and it would drastically change my life in ways that I couldn't even imagine at the age of 12. Type 1 diabetes is not something that humans bring on themselves. It's not the one where if you gain a lot of weight, you get it. That is type 2, and you can't get rid of it. I've taken 4 or more shots a day for 15 years, and I check my blood sugar multiple times a day. And I'm okay with it. Although, as we will learn later in this book, she really doesn't take care of it a lot of the time. Also around the same time, her adopted brother Mike passes away. She says I was pretty angry for those first few years of my diagnosis. After being diagnosed with diabetes and losing my brother Mike, I desperately needed something positive to happen to me. So I was ecstatic to get my first real boyfriend. I desperately wanted to fit in. I spent time obsessing over him and trying to do everything to please him. After 4 months of dating, he convinced me that it was time we took things further intimately. He wasn't a virgin, but I was. I wanted to save myself for marriage, just like I'd been taught, but he explained that if I wasn't going to have sex with him, there were plenty of other girls out there who would. I thought I'd already been spoiled from what those older boys did to me when I was a child. What did I have to lose? I won't go into detail, but I can assure you it was a miserable experience, and I remember thinking, I don't think this is how it's supposed to feel. It hurt and I begged him to stop. Could I have said no and walked away? Yes. But did I? No. He said that I was the one who wasn't normal, which in my mind was one of the worst things someone could say because I wanted to fit in so badly. And she was only about 14 when this happened. And this was not Josh, this was somebody before Josh, but Josh comes into the story soon. Lying in my bed feeling guilty, nervous, and less loved than I had before. I knew in my heart that this couldn't be the way that I was supposed to feel or what God wanted for me. He was very controlling. I craved his approval and I worked hard to have the perfect hair, makeup, and body to please him. We dated for almost 2 long, controlling, miserable years. On Valentine's Day during the second year we were dating, he basically abandons her. He tells her that, get dressed, I'm gonna take you out on a date, and he just never comes and she stays up waiting by the door till 4 a.m., which is very sad. And someone later tells her that that boyfriend was at a party making out with another girl and he banged all of her friends. And this is like freshman year of high school. That's it. This is over. So she goes to a basketball game to try to get over it with her friends, and her friend introduced her to a boy. The boy he introduced me to was so shy, I practically had to force him to give me a handshake. He was wearing cowboy boots, jeans, cut-off shirt, and I was instantly drawn to him. He was tall, dark, and handsome. He was chewing tobacco, and honestly, he was so redneck looking, but it didn't faze me because a lot of guys in my hometown look similar. Who do we think this is? That's so funny because he was in the last Team Mom OG episodes spitting on tobacco in the middle of like a nice restaurant at brunch. So just kind of funny how nothing has changed over the past 11 years. Still a redneck. Before I could even search for Josh, I saw that I had a MySpace message from him. This is 2010 and they're still using MySpace. That's how you know this is out in the country. We stopped using that in 2008 where I live. It said, "Hi Mackenzie, I thought you were so pretty when we met tonight. Would you like to go out with me sometimes?" I was so young, just 15, didn't even have my driver's license. He made his friend drive him on the first date, which was to see the movie Valentine. I really don't remember a darn thing about the movie because we talked all the way through it. Josh was talking? What drew me to Josh was his calm and even manner. As someone who is hyper and wants to do all the talking, I love this quality in him. He oozed southern charm, not even putting his arm around me or holding my hand during the movie. I thought maybe he was just nervous, but I quickly learned that was just Josh. What a change from my last boyfriend. My ex was hyper and energetic like me and it drove me nuts. Balance in relationship matters. And a lot of people say that they're incompatible because Mackenzie is so like hyped up and extroverted and Josh is so boring and bland. But she says that they actually fit pretty well like that. I would disagree by watching, but it's not my relationship. After the first date, things got serious. I mean, Josh wanted to marry me within a month. He was head over heels and so was I. And although he was slow to hold her hand and all that, apparently they were not slow to start having sex. Shortly after that first date, my ex started to try to creep back into my life by calling me and asking if I was dating Josh. I told him yes, and that we kissed too. I had chased this ex for so long that when I finally moved on, he got jealous and wanted me back. I ended up going over to my ex's house. I didn't know what to do with the emotions I was feeling. This guy who I thought I loved and who I lost my virginity to finally wanted me as much as I had once wanted him. He was telling me how much he missed me and wanted to see me. I thought that this would reaffirm my feelings for Josh. Yeah, that's why you went to his house. What started out as just seeing my ex just one last time turned out to be more. I'm not proud to admit this part of my life. I made the same mistake with him more than once. Josh eventually found out I was cheating and I felt the guilt sinking in. I set the standard of unfaithfulness in our relationship. I had no idea how hard it would be to turn around after our cheating. Then Josh started messing around with another girl at a party. He claimed we weren't together anymore, but we had never officially broken up. So not too long after this, she finds out that she's pregnant. She says Josh seemed excited, maybe even more excited than I was at the thought of welcoming a baby. I was conflicted. But what about becoming a college cheerleader? Would I ever get to be a cheer coach? It seemed that my whole life was up in the air. So she goes to the doctor and the doctor walks in and says, "First, I'd like to ask you why you let your 16-year-old daughter get pregnant." And her mom says, "That's not why we're here. We're here for medical attention. That's your job, so give us the answers we need." And honestly, I hate when doctors try to get like all up in your personal life and start giving you advice. Like, you're not a psychologist, stop judging me. Like, that's why people don't want to go to the doctor. She's also been ignoring her diabetes while she's pregnant, so the doctor says that there's an 80% chance that the baby will die. And she even says, if you love your daughter, you will go get her an abortion. She is way too young, she's diabetic, and she's high risk. Which is just an awful thing to say to a teenager. Mackenzie talks about how obviously due to her religious beliefs, they were not going to do that. Her mom says, that's not why we're here, she's going to have this baby. With that, she grabbed my arm, marched out of the office, and we never went back to that doctor again. And I hope they left a nasty Yelp review. The baby was the only thing that could get me to start paying attention to my health. But I was worrying about money. I'd heard of 16 and pregnant, but I had never seen it because my parents didn't let me watch MTV, which is hilarious. She was not allowed to watch MTV, but she was out here getting pregnant. So she applies. She thinks it's funny how, although I was about to be a parent, I still had to ask my own parents for permission to be on the show. They agree only because her mom wants to use the show to spread the word of God. I guess they must have cut that from the final cut in the episode. Josh was not for it. He says, hell no, I'm not going to be on any TV show. But if you know me, I refuse to be controlled. So she somehow manages to convince Josh, and I think anyone watching the show can see how obvious it is that Josh does not want to be there. She gets fired from her job because the parents are embarrassed that one of the daycare workers, which was what she did, was on a TV show, and when she asked them why they fired her, they said they had seen me eat a baby puff while feeding the babies the day before. It's protocol that we don't do that. Yeah, I'm sure that was why. She also ends up getting bullied while she's on the show. Someone had scrawled "attention whore" on the windshield of my car, along with a photo of dripping boobs that said, "got milk?" Once again, I felt that familiar sense of humiliation creep through my body. So they start filming. Eventually, it gets to her due date, which she's huge because usually diabetics have huge babies, and she has to have a C-section. So they start prepping for the C-section, and she says, Josh took one look over the curtain, saw my stomach cut wide open, and he threw up. Handing him a barf bag, the nurses put him in a chair and rolled him out of the room. He missed seeing his first child, Gannon Dwayne McKee, be born. Josh was smiling ear to ear through the window, though. The C-section's very hard on her. She says the epidural began to paralyze my lungs. I stopped breathing and technically died. It was so scary. Sadly, Josh was not fully on board with playing the dad role. He didn't come around very often those first few months after he was born, and my mom and I were really the ones raising him, and actually it was more of her mom, which she admits, and we could also see it in Teen Mom 3 if anybody actually watched that. It was mostly her mom doing all the work. Once Teen Mom 3 starts airing, she says, I wasn't as humble as I should have been. The more my name got out there, I'd look for ways to do things to get myself talked about more for attention and fame. Josh told me I was changing and it bothered him, but I love being in the spotlight. After the show came out, Josh and I started really drifting apart. I was getting more and more disappointed with Josh, and I had no idea what direction I wanted to go in. I went from, I'm so crazy in love with this guy, to he is nothing. He's still kind of nothing. It's true that I probably became a little too preoccupied with being on TV, but I didn't have much else going for me. Things with Josh were so rough. There's a while when my mom was disappointed in him and didn't think I should be with him anymore. Fans who watched the show began noticing that he really didn't show me any emotion or affection. In his defense, Josh is very old-fashioned, but he wouldn't even hold my hands or get close to me in front of our friends, even when we weren't being filmed, because he thinks it's trashy and uncomfortable to do that in front of others. He was affectionate behind closed doors, and he was 100% better when the cameras weren't rolling, but they made him look like a loser on the show. He's not the jerk that people think he is. Then they randomly get married one day. Josh just says, hey, you want to get married? Picked her up, and while she was still living in her mom's house, and she had just turned 18, drive her to the courthouse, and they do it real quick. Which reminds me of that Bruno Mars song, like, I'm looking for something dumb to do. I think I'm gonna marry you. That day was so wonderful, in fact, that I've done the math, and I promise you, that was the very night I got pregnant for the second time. And they had their honeymoon in her mom's house, so you can imagine that. Right after starting college, that's when I found out I was pregnant again. My heart was shattered. I couldn't go to cheer squad, couldn't practice at games, and then I broke my foot, so I really couldn't do anything. But then I realized there's no way I would have stayed with Josh if I had went to college. There were too many distractions and temptations. Wow, you gave up college for Josh. That's a little bit sad. Eventually, they actually do have a much bigger wedding in a barn with all their family there, and that's the one that we've seen pictures of. Which some people criticize her dress at that wedding, but I actually thought it was pretty. After we got married, it was like a switch went off all of a sudden for Josh. He wanted to be Gannon's best buddy, and he was doing all he could to be a better dad. He's apologized to me so many times for not being there in the first year of his life. And then she talks about how, with her second baby, which was a girl, she was really afraid to have a girl because I didn't know how I could protect my daughter from having the same kind of damaging experiences I had when I was a child. Which her second child, Jaxie, was born in February 2014 when she was 19 years old. She talks about how after this, Josh used to have anger problems, but he has never hurt me. He's punched holes in the wall and had a drinking problem, but you can't make him mad even if you tried. I could say the worst thing ever to him and he would just say, love you, because he knows it's just petty and there's no point in getting mad. Yeah, he doesn't really have any emotions, to be honest. She talks about how she was the one to get him jobs. When Teen Mom 3 gets canceled, I missed the attention I had from TV and I needed something positive in my life. So I met a producer who sold herself as a mentor, and I thought this would be a chance to get back in the spotlight. Now this is actually Gina Rodriguez, who is basically this D-list agent. She's represented Farrah Abraham, Honey Boo Boo, all these irrelevant ass Z-list celebrities. And this is the one who tells her that you need to release a sex tape. This producer promised she could help me achieve the level of fame and wealth that I wanted so badly, if I just trusted her and let her handle boosting my image and relevance. Things got weird quickly. She said all I had to do was tell her that someone leaked a sex tape of me. To be clear, there is no sex tape. She told me I could turn this into speaking engagements for young girls trying to lead better Christian lives. I know, it doesn't make sense to me either in retrospect, and I don't know why I fell for it. So she has me fly to LA, get in a car, and she tells me, shake this man's hand. And someone took a few pictures. Little did I know I was shaking hands with a famous porn producer, and this was all arranged to generate publicity. Then she tells me to accidentally send her a picture of my boobs that she could leak to the press, and that's when things would really take off. There was no way I was going to do that, and she got angry and called the whole deal off. This later led to me losing a job as a cheer coach because mom saw the story on the internet that I was a porn star. Which, if you look up articles, there actually was a sex tape, so I don't know why she's saying that there wasn't. However, it never got released. And I'm sure this was extremely embarrassing for Josh, who is so shy. That Gina Rodriguez lady is, like, so trashy. She gets really into bodybuilding, which we saw on the show. However, due to giving birth and also having knots in her arm from diabetes shots, she was never able to go too far in it, which really kind of crushes her dreams. Also, she gets pregnant for the third time, and this one she was really angry at Josh about. And she starts having a lot of mental health issues, feeling like she has no opportunities. One day I texted Josh that I didn't want to live anymore. I told my parents, of course, and they're all afraid I was about to make a bad decision. So he called the cops on me and told them I was threatening to commit suicide. I was livid and started screaming at Josh and the police. I was almost 8 months pregnant and scared for the baby. I pleaded with the cops to let me go home. I told them I was diabetic, but they completely ignored me, handcuffed me, and brought me to a mental hospital. Now this scene is really sad. The more I screamed for medical attention for my diabetes, as my sugar was high, the cops sat in a circle in the hospital room and laughed at me. I couldn't believe it. I had been there for 3 hours, and the cops came to tell me my crazy husband was at the door trying to get me out. Finally, I let out the biggest scream of my life, and I said, someone give me insulin now or my baby's going to die. The cops stood up and slammed me down on a bed. One had a hand over my mouth to shut me up. The other two handcuffed me on my back, making breathing nearly impossible. I closed my eyes and knew this was going to be the end of my baby's life. So keep in mind, she is 8 months pregnant at this point, and she says, in between crying for insulin and even blacking out due to my diabetes a few times, I said, so, if my baby dies because you guys refuse to be insulin, you will get sued, right? A nurse looked me straight in the eye and said, no ma'am, we don't have to give you anything, she said before walking away. I always loved and stood up for cops, but how could they sit here and watch me cry out for help while sipping coffee and laughing at me? I know that most police are good people, but here they did not understand my needs. Josh tried to tell the police about the diabetes, but they had me in custody now and they were not going to let me go. Be careful if someone threatens suicide about immediately calling, because sometimes they really force you into these facilities. I think it's called Baker Act in Florida at least, or 5150 hold. And they will keep you there no matter how much you want to leave or how much you weren't even serious when you said that. So just be careful about that, because this experience that she had here is like horrifying for me to read. I felt like they were refusing to give me insulin, so I would actually go crazy and they could keep me there longer. They had a teenage boy worker watching me when I slept. And they told me I wouldn't go home in less than a week. The teenage boy watches her every move, also watches her go to the bathroom and take a shower, which is, I'm like, is that even legal to have a male nurse watching you do all those things? Like, sounds like a lawsuit coming to me. And what really sets her off is that she finds out that her mom was not fighting to get her out of the situation. Instead, she encouraged Josh to come rip my kids from me, and she knew the cops had taken me in and encouraged it. She thought I was just depressed. I can only live for so many days without insulin, and the baby I was carrying could die from insulin shock if I didn't get that shot soon. Instead of helping me, the workers in the hospital just kept me in this closed-off room. If I wasn't depressed before, I certainly was now. They took my cell phone, and the hospital was full of teenage workers who didn't know what they were doing. I was so humiliated. I couldn't believe this was legal. The nurse tells her her husband has been waiting outside and walking in circles all night. We're going to allow him to come in and be interviewed to see if you can go home. She said, did you talk to my mom? And they said, yes. She told us you've always been this way and you need help. My head was spinning. My mom said that? I couldn't believe it. Why would she do this to me? Finally, Josh walks in and is able to pick her up, but they still have her handcuffed, and in this hospital gown that she's naked underneath it, she feels humiliated. Finally, they're able to take her home, finally give her first insulin shot in days, and get her some food. I walked into my mother's house, stared her and my father in the eyes, and said nothing more than, "Fuck you," before grabbing my kids and walking out. I felt so betrayed. Josh said that he couldn't handle me anymore, so I gave him my wedding ring and he left. I didn't talk to Josh or my mom for about a month, which was about the rest of my pregnancy. My doctor started a lawsuit with the institution, but I told him I didn't have the money, time, or stability to relive that moment in court, and I let it go. He told me I was lucky that my baby was even alive. Which, girl, filed a lawsuit. That is horrible. If I went through that experience, best believe I would be filing a lawsuit real quick. And don't even worry about the cost, because if you win those things, you don't have to pay. The opposing people pay for your lawyer's fees, so that just breaks my heart that she didn't want to go through with the lawsuit after getting treated like that. She could have died from diabetes. Her baby could have died. Whew. The state of mental health in this country. Then when it comes to give birth, the doctor comes in. He looks so distraught, stern, and serious that it dawned on me that I might have to deliver a stillbirth baby. Luckily, he is delivered, and he is not stillbirth. He is alive. This was her third child, Bronx. However, he was very sick, and he had holes in his heart. So he was in the NICU for about a month. I have never seen Josh so inconsolable. After 2 weeks, they finally let me hold him, and after that, he had to take heart medication. After this, I started to develop severe PPD. I began to have very selfish thoughts. I was only 21, and my whole life since I was 16 was spent having kids with the same man. I wondered if there was something better out there. I started to sneak behind Josh's back and go to the bars with my friends. Finally, something fun in my life, and I started getting attention from other guys while I was out. I met a man, and we started talking frequently. I knew it was wrong to cheat, but I guess I was so down that I thought this would give me the boost I needed. Josh finds out, tells her I know everything and I'm moving out. This was the start of a big downward spiral for me. I had no way to pay the bills. So she's really depressed, and then one day, Josh decides to just take the kids from her. I was in the bathroom, I wrapped a towel around myself and opened the door. Josh was gone, and so were my kids. I called Josh's cell, but I got his voicemail, so I left an angry message saying I was going to call the cops. When I called the cops, though, they said since Josh is the father, it wasn't a kidnapping. I drove to his house, no one answered the door, and it became clear that his parents were trying to help him hide the kids from me. Later, I found out that my mom had orchestrated this whole thing with Josh. When I found out the kids were at her house, I called and I screamed in a fit of rage. How dare you take my kids from me? I was an absolute mess. And instead of having my back, my mom went behind my back to make a plan with Josh to protect me from myself. It took me a long time to recover from this. Mackenzie's mom, I don't know, she has her little moments in this book. Like, was Mackenzie really doing that bad that you had to go take the kids without even asking her? It's kind of a weird thing to do. And scary for her mom. And Josh himself is also not doing too well. He says, I did hear from my friends that Josh wasn't doing too well either, and out of anger from being separated from me, he was drinking a lot. I wish I had listened to him about getting help sooner. And then you can see, always at the end of her chapter, she puts like, crowning achievement, and then she goes into how her religion has helped her and all that. But like, I just found it interesting that her mom helped Josh take all the kids from her house to bring them to Josh, and then Josh has a drinking problem too. So it's like, do you accomplish what you wanted there? After this, after Teen Mom 3 is done, but before she gets hired on Team Mom OG, she kind of struggles with her purpose a lot. She's always liked fitness, and she does have a certificate in cosmetology, but she can't seem to like hold down a cosmetology job. Like, she'll be starving, and then she'll do something like this. Everyone kept telling me to just go to work in a salon because I was so broke. I started to think maybe they were right, so I applied to one, I was hired on the spot, and then I decided not to even show up the next day. That night I realized that I couldn't work there, and I needed to focus on creating my own fitness business, which did end up working out for her, but it's like, she's just so impulsive, and she does mention that she has ADHD, so I'm sure that contributes to it, but she just cannot hold down one steady job for too long. And even when she's like starving, and she mentions in here she was so skinny that Josh had to bring her food, she was that broke, but you can't show up for like one day of work. It's just interesting to me. But I will say that her fitness business that she started, I think it's called Body by Mac, it actually ended up being pretty successful for her, so in the end it worked out. She continues to cheat on Josh even when they're kind of on and off. He tells her that he's ashamed of her, but he's also cheating on her a lot too. Then they get a $4,000 tax refund. She's behind on all her bills, the rent isn't paid, but she decides to invest that into her Body by Mac fitness business. Everyone thought she was crazy. It took her 6 months to set everything up, set up a website, film everything. But it ends up making $20,000 on the first week. No one is questioning or laughing at me now, but it took 4 rough years to get to this point. But because I was consistent and didn't give up, I turned my dream into reality. First thing I did when I got paid was go grocery shopping for the first time without having to look at my bank account first, and then I paid off my car loan. So finally we see some good decisions here. It upsets me when people say that Body by Mac is only successful because I was on TV. I had to crawl out of a very dark spot to get here. I did this when I didn't have many followers. MTV dropped me and I wasn't on TV anymore. Didn't even have money for groceries, but I built this from the ground up. I promise I would have become something without MTV. While it's true that she might have been successful without MTV, it is also true that MTV did help you a lot with that business. She did have a decent amount of followers from that, and no doubt it helped. I mean, come on. So then she talks a little bit about her mom's struggle with her health, having lung cancer, and that this is also a time when her and Josh started to struggle. Anytime he would try to be intimate, I would shut him down. It got to the point of no touching at all, and I knew eventually he would need someone else to be intimate with. He would beg me, but I just didn't want to be near him. I resented him, and I started to rethink my life, coming to the awkward headspace of imagining a better life with someone else. I knew if I met someone better, I'd simply leave Josh and move on. I fell in love with him for his quietness and his southern charm, but reading comments on the internet of people questioning how someone fun like me could be with someone as boring as Josh made me want to experiment with someone more fun and outgoing. And if only she carried that out to the end and left Josh. So Josh gets into doing rodeos, and he ends up cheating on her with the girl, and this is the part where she's back on Team Mom OG. And I think this is the beginning of when she first gets on. So we did see this on TV, but there is some behind the scenes information on here. I found out who the other woman was, because I wanted to talk to her and get her version of what happened. And she was insistent that she didn't touch my ugly husband, as she called him, and that I had the wrong woman. Your ugly husband. I mean, it wasn't ugly when you were doing that thing with him, but not getting any clarity from her, I called one of the guys whom Josh had been traveling with and put him on speakerphone since Josh was there to listen too. I knew this guy would probably rat out Josh because I was aware that this friend liked me. And guess what? He did just that. I let him tell the story on speaker, and I'll never forget the look of pain on Josh's face as he heard it. Here I was dealing with the possibility of losing my mom to cancer, and now I had to deal with Josh stepping out on me. He explained it was just a one-night stand, and he begged me to explain to him why I was no longer intimate with him. I instantly regretted all the times I begged him to just go out and have a good night with some whore to get it out of his system because I had no desire to be with him anymore. And she talks about how she almost wishes that she wasn't on TV during this point because she probably wouldn't have found out if she wasn't on TV, and she almost just didn't even want to know. I had done my fair share of cheating myself and was fantasizing about a relationship with a new man. The moral of my story, I learned, was that we had gotten married way too young and that this marriage had been a hot mess since day one. We went to counseling, and when we got home that night after counseling, I broke. The pain and anger I held in all came out, and I went through our house with a hammer and shattered every photo of him, the kids, and me together. To this day, I still can't hang pictures of our family in the house. Psycho. She calls her ex, hooks up with him. I took pictures with my ex and sent them to Josh. I had divorce papers ready to go, but Josh would not sign them. She starts taking Benadryl with vodka in hopes that I could block this all out. But before I was able to return with the divorce papers, I started getting presents on my doorstep. Every day for 10 days, a gift would appear, and on the 11th day, there were directions for a detailed scavenger hunt. At the end of the hunt, Josh was waiting for me with a new engagement ring, and he proposed all over again. I found out that even my sister and mom had gotten involved to help plan this. So we did see that on the show, and if you recall, I remember saying on that scavenger hunt, I'm like, I am telling you, Josh did not plan this all himself. This was the MTV crew, or it was her mom and her sister helping him out. And she admits that in here, and I am just so glad right now that she admitted that Josh had a little help there because we all knew it. But she does insist that it was not MTV. She says, instead of getting Josh to redeem himself, fans who saw the show complained that MTV must have set the whole thing up, but they didn't. It was all Josh. Okay, but she literally just said here, I found out even my sister and my mom had gotten involved to help plan this. So it was not all him. I knew it wasn't. But I still thought it was cute. I mean, it wasn't all Josh. Like, come on. He kept telling me how sorry he was. He would text my mom about how regretful he was, and she would send it to me. But she didn't want to show everyone that she was weak and had such low self-esteem that she couldn't really reject his apology. As her mom gets sicker and sicker, she says, I finally struck up the nerve and told her I needed to get something off my chest. I told my mom about the time I was molested as a child. She stared straight ahead for a few moments, silent. Was she angry at me for not telling her sooner? Did she think I was making this up? She closed her eyes and pursed her lips. Then as she slowly began nodding her head, she said, this makes a lot of sense, Mackenzie. This makes a lot of sense. She told me that whatever I felt, she never wanted me to think that this was something I deserved. This was something evil that someone else had done to me, and it wasn't a punishment for anything I did wrong. This talk went a long way in helping me accept myself for who I am. I refused to let her know who did this to me because that wasn't what mattered to me, and she apologized for the time she said I wasn't her baby girl anymore after finding out I had lost my virginity. And obviously she has the right to do whatever she wants, but I do find it sad that she didn't want to say who it was, almost like she doesn't want to hold them responsible. Like, they should be held responsible for that. I know she's very religious and it's all about forgiveness, but it's like, don't let them get away with it, you know? That's just my opinion. But soon after that, her mom gets more sick, and Mackenzie and their whole family is there with her in the hospital on her final day. She gives her mom a kiss and realizes she's cold. This was just her shell because she was in heaven now, and I imagined her holding the hands of the 2 babies I had lost due to miscarriages and telling them about how much they are loved. It was one of the few things that gave me comfort in that moment. She did not talk about her miscarriages in this book, but she did mention it there. And I do remember there being like some MySpace screenshots that she had a miscarriage the summer before she actually got pregnant with her first baby, so Gannon. I guess that might have been true, but she didn't really go into detail about it. When my mom died, I completely lost it. I began projecting all of my anger on Josh, pushing him away, crying, telling him he was awful. I had also gone on dating sites and started seeing someone else. Josh had also been living a separate life and going to another woman who I thought was my friend. This was the cousin that he cheated on her with, which was horrible. She came over and explained that she was just giving him advice and she felt bad for the way I was treating him. She even showed me text messages where he had said he was only staying with me for the kids. This didn't hurt me because of Josh, but it did hurt because I thought I knew and could trust her. I forgive her in my heart, but I will never speak to her again. Instead of staying quiet though, I wrote a status update on Facebook about it and it blew up. Of course, articles popped up about Josh cheating with this woman. I took Benadryl and drank during the day because I couldn't sleep or function. So I guess she kind of admits in here that him and her cousin were actually hooking up. Because on the show she tried to say, no, she was just giving him advice, but the way she writes it here is like, no, it wasn't just advice that they were giving each other. Now she goes into when she moved out of Oklahoma and went to Florida, which is something that we did see on the show. A week before I moved, a girl reached out to Josh and said she had inappropriate photos of me. My ex had taken those photos and saved them on his phone. He was disgusted, and now I was the one making him look bad. That's really awful of her ex to do. He just wanted everything to be over. The producers wanted to give Josh a chance to tell his side of the story, but he said, there's a difference between her and me. I don't care what people think of me, and she does care what people think of her. She runs a business where people follow her. I don't want to ruin her name or make her look bad. I just wish that she would stop doing it to me. After about a month of living apart though, Josh came down to visit, and shortly after, he moved all of his things down to live with us. I think the move helped us both realize that we just want our family back. I began to miss his warm hugs that made me feel at home, and the kids were dying to see him again. However, I followed his lead. I never called or texted first. And she goes on about how she lets him take the lead, but they are still together to this day. And that is pretty much the end of the book. It catches up to the present day. So yeah, I gave you all the main points. However, I will have a link in the description below if you want to purchase it yourself. Final thoughts. I would give it like a 3 out of 5 stars. It goes very heavy on the religion, the Bible quotes, relating her scenarios to things she learned in church, which is not a bad thing, and it's just not really something that I like to read about because it does take up a huge chunk of it, so just keep that in mind if you're gonna purchase this book. She does talk a little bit about her childhood, about her relationship with Josh. It's not super detailed. I will always go back to Farrah's book being my favorite because it's just so detailed and well written. This did have a ghostwriter, but it's just, I would say not as well written as like Farrah's book. Leah Messer also had fairly detailed book. It was fairly detailed. The only thing I didn't like about Leah's was it didn't go up to the present day, and this one did go up to the present day. She was pretty good about admitting her faults. She admitted that she is kind of a fame whore. Didn't use those exact words, but she basically said that. She also admits to all the times that she cheated, as well as Josh cheating. And overall, I think she's a good person, you know. She's definitely very loud and kind of annoying, and her and Josh's relationship never really made sense to me, but I guess opposites can attract, right? If Straightening My Crown sounds interesting to you, go ahead and click the link in the description down below. I put a link to go purchase the book. I do make a little commission off that, you know, help your girl out. That's all for today's video. Let me know what you guys thought of this book and what I read to you in the comments down below. And make sure to subscribe for more recaps and Teen Mom content every week.